Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Layer by Layer, the show about the 3D printing industry and what Slant 3D is doing inside of it. Today, we're going to be talking about the industry in 2024, Lionel Messi's shoebox, and why there aren't more 3D printed products out there in the world. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The industry in 2024. So, people have recently been discussing how interest rates have taken a little bit of a bump the last year or so. And due to that, many companies are going out of business. Many companies are consolidating, merging, moving around. Because when you increase interest rates, the cost to have money is more. So many of these companies that are very highly leveraged and have raised a bunch of debt and investment debt, investment, which is effectively a form of debt, are struggling right now. Here's the thing, and this is more of a personal opinion than anything else. Money and capital has been exceptionally cheap for about the last 10 to 15 years. Ever since the Great Recession, interest rates have been astoundingly low. Lower than at any point ever in history. And they created this place where money could flow freely because if you gave somebody $1, they paid you back $1 and a penny. And that is not an expensive trade, and everybody would do that. But then with all the inflation of COVID, interest rates increased because inflation was getting away, and to slow down inflation, the interest rates are increased. That being said, if you are in a high growth, technology-based industry generally that is venture fundable, a general rule of thumb for venture funded firms is that you have to have margins of at least 25%. Net margins, profits of at least 25%. You have to have a subscription software that is pretty darn profitable compared to your cost of goods sold in order to be investable at all. Preferably 50%, ideally 100%. Those used to be the expectations for venture funding. Most 3D printing companies do not maintain those type of margins. Most 3D printing companies are somewhere in the 20 to 30% margin range if they're selling machinery, which means that when interest rates go up, they drop down 5 to 10% and their profit ranges decrease even more. And now they're making 10 to 15% net on it all because their cost of paying off their debts has increased. So that all being said, if your business is so fragile that a 10% fluctuation in operations radically hurts you, you are in a bad position. Now, I fully understand being ambitious and reaching and stretching and spreading yourself thin. But if you're spread so thin to where it's unrecoverable and a 10% fluctuation hits you, that's just bad operations. It just simply is, because a 10% fluctuation should be expected, especially when you are in a new industry like 3D printing. The waves in the storm of a new industry being created are much higher and fluctuate way further than that. And the industry is definitely feeling this. They got a big old spike from COVID. We all got a big old spike from COVID. And then it fell off way more than 10%, which is also hurting the industry, side note. There's been about I would imagine about a 25% decrease in demand for 3D printed goods since the pandemic, which is recovering back up, but very few people got to a plateau and stayed there. Most fell back off. So anyhow, I think that's probably more of a factor. The fact that there was this big old hype with COVID and then the demand fell off because printing didn't hike itself up and grab that rung of the ladder and stay there. And now with interest rates increasing over the last year, it's added more to where now there's a reduction of 35% to where people are getting real hurt. But to any operators out there, if you are operating a business, if you're running a small business from an Etsy store to a startup to a company, if 10% breaks you, you seriously need to, if a 10% change scares you to where it's existential, you really need to evaluate your operating procedures, because you're wasting something, or you're in the wrong business, or you're a zombie that won't be able to survive. You have to have way better margins than that if that breaks you. So that. Um, there's a note here about U.S. manufacturing, and I talk about U.S. manufacturing a lot, but in the context of the industry in the new year, every 3D printing company should have an exceptional amount of demand if they are able to make parts. The solution is there, and the world understands it now, but 3D printing is not fulfilling its own promises. And I don't mean that in the context of like it can't. 3D printing can do all the things that have been promised historically from 3D printing, but the companies are just simply not doing that. They're operating as if they are a company that have been around for 100 years when they've been around for 10. And the industry isn't hungry enough in order to take the leaps of when Amazon was created back in 1995 and that kind of stuff. In the first 3 to 5 years, they obviously had all the benefit of the growth of the internet and being one of the first e-commerce sites around. But Amazon lost money for many, many years until I don't think they became profitable until like 2010 or something like that. But they spent billions upon billions of dollars building out warehouses and infrastructure and that kind of thing for years before they were able to start leveraging that infrastructure and making a profit from it. I don't think anyone in the 3D printing industry thinks that long term to where they're willing to be flat or even a little bit negative or even greatly negative in order to gain actual operational moats other than buying patents. And buying patents is the stupidest form of competitive moat in the world, but the topic for a different day. But all of the companies are in this kind of small-minded idea. They're trying to grab some more of the $15 billion 3D printing industry, but very few of them are trying to grab the broader manufacturing industry by taking the hits that are necessary, which is run the machines, maybe break even at a loss, or with the capability to get those small margins, still talking about the 10% margin. If you are overextending yourself and cutting prices and that kind of thing, it is something that you can walk back and then refocus on a niche and make the money. So that does not invalidate that previous part of the conversation, by the way. But so many of the companies are not planning 10 years ahead to where they are providing a service or a part that customers want that they can do better. There are many customers out there who want 3D printing, but the factors that come up are cost or education very often. And companies are not providing for either one of those two things. They're not being cost effective. They're saying, well, we're 3D printing, we 3D print these parts. So we only continue to 3D print the same incestuous batch of parts for aerospace and that kind of thing. To broaden out and start pursuing other sectors is something that the industry needs to do more, because right now, very few people are pursuing the actual products of 3D printing. So there's that. There's a lot of U.S. manufacturing demand. There's not enough of traditional manufacturing inside of the United States. There is a ton of opportunity for 3D printing companies if you want to make a part for a client. So that's the 2024. As far as 2024 as a year as a whole, a bunch of people are going to get sold, a bunch of people are going to go out of business, a bunch of people are going to merge together, just as has been going on for the last year. But 2024 is going to be a fantastic year for 3D printing. This year is going to be a tipping point in many, many different ways, because there are many 3D printed products that are starting to hit scale and are going to continue to scale more. There is no longer any sort of stigma around 3D printed parts. More people are using it, more people want to use it. The reason, this follows into the next thing, the reason there are not more 3D printed products, right there on the notes. Why are there not more 3D printed products? If 3D printing is able to do this, why are there not more parts out there? The reason historically has always been scale. No one could produce a product with 3D printing because as soon as they sold it to Walmart, 3D printing couldn't make 10 to 100,000 parts. That has been a solved problem for over 5 years. Solved problem. You can make millions of parts with 3D printing and do it perfectly profitably, very environmentally friendly, and reliably. Scale has always been the challenge because printing was always inconsistent and the standards were inconsistent. The standards are still inconsistent, by the way. It requires us here at Slant 3D to talk to each client and effectively put together a checklist for each one of their products to say, what are you okay with and what are you not? Because there's going to be variability. And that variability is something that we work to fight out every day. But scale has been something the industry has not touted enough. All these independent small businesses are utilizing it and leveraging it. There's a lot of small businesses really leveraging 3D printing and making cool products, but not leveraging all of its capabilities around fulfillment or iteration on the level of like a software startup. But very few companies are also enabling that scale reliably. 3D printing, people think mass production in 3D printing is still like 1,000 parts. 1,000 parts is not mass production. Not to be pedantic, but there's not really a definition of mass production. But the 3D printing industry seems to think that $1,000 is mass manufacturing. It is not. It is not. We define it as 25,000 pieces because that's what Toyota defines it as. But side thing. But yes, the reason more 3D printed products haven't existed is because if a designer created a product, they historically could not rely on printing to carry it through into mass production. But that's not the case anymore. And that is becoming clearer very quickly to where 2024, 2025, the acceleration of 3D printed products is going to be quite substantial. Because now, rather than, I've designed a 3D printed product, it's popping off, I have to build a print farm, or I have to buy an MJF machine, or whatever else it was. There's now the capability to say, I've got this successful product. There is an organization or a system or a giant factory that I can send this to, like Slant 3D or others or whatever it was, to where you can mass produce your part reliably with 3D printing. There's still prep, there's still the manufacturing process within that, but it's all doable. The scale is now there to where a part can be designed and carried all the way through into production with 3D printing. And that's a fairly recent development. And there was a whole wrinkle of the pandemic in there to where a lot of people weren't designing stuff. I think this will be accelerated even more as kind of recessionary fears start taking hold on people over the next year. Guys, every year for the last several years, people have said, recession's coming, recession's coming, recession's coming. And I'm going to add to it, recession's coming. It's inevitable. We've been going up quite a while for a while. And most capitalistic societies go up and down in cycles of about 10 years. The States has. There's always been one about every 10 or 15 years by the clock. You can set your watch by it over the last 100 years. But since everybody is anticipating it, you tend to avoid it, which means that you get slapped by something that you're not paying attention to. This is like the housing market. This is like not 2001, but a number of other recessions. Just some piece of dry rot inside the house that causes the roof to fall in. So we're due for that dry rot. Don't know what it is. Could be a bunch of stuff. Could be student loan debt. Or anything else that could cause a financial recession that's fairly significant. So planning around that. In a recession, people always become more entrepreneurial. When your job doesn't pay as well, you're going to start a side hustle or something like that. So Etsy stores and 3D printed products and that kind of thing are going to become more common than ever before. It's good for anyone helping those people. Because number one, it will grow the economy long term, because as you come out of recession, you have all of these businesses that are now been quenched in fire and can grow as the economy bounces back. So they start at bare bottom and they're able to grow with the economy and hopefully grow better than the economy. So the vast majority of the time in a recession period, there are a ton of really cool companies created and grown and built. So yeah, silver lining on that stuff. Recessions are great. You get cool companies out of them all the time. It helps to clear out the rot and move on to the next world. It's painful as all get out, but most things that are good for you are painful. If it's comfortable, you should almost always be suspicious, come to find. Comfort is almost never a good thing. Comfort is almost never an indicator of something good. It is either a presence of naivety or naivety, or you're just, you're naive and you don't know what's hitting you, or you're in an exceptionally isolated position to where, again, you don't know what's going to hit you. Comfort is achieved through knowing, being aware. That's true comfort. Having some sense of, I'd say, control. But even then, if you don't have an itch of some sort, generally something's about to come smack you over the head. But anyway, didn't mean to be like negative about that. There's a lot of ways to get to good and to be joyful. But going for comfort, if where you're eating cake every day, generally not a good thing. Okay. Anyhow, moving on to actual news. We opened up with like the op-ed stuff. That was interesting. News. Lionel Messi got a shoebox from Adidas. This is we looked at this story and I couldn't find out what shoes were inside of this stupid box. I'm so sorry about this, guys, but we tried to find what shoes were in the box. I assume they were a pair of 3D printed cleats or something coming from Adidas, given the theme of it. But the stories that we found were only about the box, which kind of seems like a PR stunt or something like that to be focusing on the box, because they made a dodecahedron shoebox to give to Lionel Messi. It was 3D printed by a company named Wasp in Italy, which is an FDM 3D printing company. And it looks cool. It looks good. It's actually a really good demo of FDM. You cannot tell that it's an FDM machine. It's immaculate. It's a great looking box. Oh, guys, everybody out there, please do something interesting. Please. This was newsworthy. We scraped and we looked around, and today we're talking about not the shoes that Lionel Messi got from Adidas at the Ballon d'Or Awards. It was the freaking box. Do you want to see boxes that were more interesting than this? We made a video about premium retail packaging like 6 months ago. Better stuff. And we did it for a video. I want a news story out there right now about that video, because we're talking about the flippin' box. Truly stand alone, one of a kind. Really make a statement there. No one cares. Put the mic far away from me so now I can't like breathe into it. See, I want to do this, but I'm over here, so now I can yell. The flippin' box. You know, to be fair, when I first saw that on the notes, I was a little bit more optimistic about it. I was like, oh, it's kind of cool. I'm going to spin this or something when we talk about it. But now I'm in it. I'm like, I just don't care. This is dumb. I'm so good for Wasp. It's a great print. To everybody else, it's a box. This is not moving the industry forward. This is doing nothing interesting. It's doing nothing new or different. It's not defining anything at all. It's a box. But the box looked cool. Nothing interesting about the geometry of it. It was a dodecahedron. You could have folded it out of cardboard. It had some shoes in it. We don't know what the shoes are. I assume they're 3D printed. Might not have been. They could have been gold plated. I literally couldn't find it. I couldn't find video of Messi taking this. If you have video of it, please link to it down below, because I want to know what was in the box. Because I couldn't find what was in the box. The stupid box had a whole article written around it. And I know that 3D printing news is rough. To the news websites, I get it. I have to do 2 stories a week. You guys have to try to keep the site up and rolling by having stuff around. So you have to write about the box or take the payment for writing the article about the box or whatever it was. I get that. To the rest of the industry, do something interesting, please. A box. been a long week. Okay, regular stuff now. That was all the news. That was the only news story we really had. We couldn't find anything else interesting. Tangled Filament. We will be releasing Tangled Filament again here in a couple of weeks. We'll start having batches. The goal is to not run out of stock. That's the goal, because you guys are freaking sucking the stuff up. So thank you for that. We do appreciate that, and we're trying to get it deployed and continue to scale this up to continue decreasing the pricing. But yes, we'll have another release of Tangled Filament here soon. Once we're coming off of Christmas. Christmas finished up for Slant 3D. Like, the final big push of the Christmas rush happened literally at the beginning of this week or so. So we got the last packages that were ordered the day before Christmas or the day of Christmas, or people spending their Christmas money and that kind of stuff. And the last guys using the app and the Etsy integration and that kind of thing. The last bits of fulfillment to make sure everybody was in place. Now we've been in our revamp week since then. Yes, updates on that stuff all coming soon on all those kind of things. Because yes, the team is working to get that all revamped and that kind of stuff. Tangled testing. Should have brought this up at the beginning of the show. I'll bring it up at the end. Maybe people will get there. Kickstarter. The Kickstarter for the filament testing lab. What we're going to do, as the Kickstarter has been going on, we've been doing continuous number of testing videos, and those videos continue to do quite well, receiving between 20 and about 50,000 views, actually, guys. And they seem to be useful to the community and something that certainly needs done. We've discussed why testing needs done, because nobody knows what the filament is, or what it can do. So there is the Kickstarter. That'll help us out a bunch, but we are planning on basically spinning off a separate YouTube channel for those testing videos to go on to, fully independent. That way it pulls it away from Slant 3D and lets us focus on that channel exclusively and the content around that and testing and breaking stuff. So it's a different format. It allows us to work with other 3D printing or filament manufacturers and that kind of stuff too. Also, note to filament manufacturers, we are not a filament manufacturer. Slant 3D is not a filament manufacturer. We started making filament because you guys weren't doing your job. Now, here's the thing. This is going to sound bad. Our suppliers are fantastic, and we need all of our suppliers. And the ones that we work with very well, and we pay them what they ask. And that's part of the deal. The reason Slant 3D started making filaments several years ago is because no one was addressing our need in the market. We produce parts, and quite frankly, we compete with injection molding, which has the raw material cost of injection molding beads. When we started making filament, we were having to purchase filament wholesale. Wholesale filament is nowhere near the cost of beads. But we're trying to compete in mass production. For us, and there was no roadmap. We tried to work with all the suppliers to do this. There was no roadmap for us to be able to work with the supplier and make a compelling business reason for them to work with us. Because right now, all the 3D printer filament is targeted towards consumers. And a consumer hobbyist is willing to pay $25 to $40 for a spool of filament. They like it cheaper, but they're okay paying $20, 20 or $30. So why would a filament manufacturer, when the consumer industry is growing so quickly, why would a filament manufacturer entertain and use up capacity on a customer that wants more of their capacity at lower margins? Say I went to a successful filament manufacturer right now and I said, hey, we'll buy all of your capacity wholesale. They would probably say no, because we sell 85% of our capacity at retail, direct to customer. We make way more money selling individual spools than we would selling pallets of the stuff to you, Gabe, even if you bought it all. It's not interesting enough for us to be able to keep the lights on and being profitable, when we could be making a lot more profit by selling to consumers. I totally get that, which is why we started manufacturing filament. Now, here's the thing, and this is in the context of this, what the manufacturers have effectively done is they've created a monster. Because since we make filament for our own internal use, we're in this interesting leveraged position to where we don't have to make a profit off filament, which is the whole kind of premise of Tangled. Guys, yeah, for the record, everybody, Tangled filament is not profitable. We have not paid off the machinery or anything else that we put into it from sales of filament. Sales of filament is an optimization that has a payback over months to years, probably years, because we are going to keep on cutting the price down as we scale it up. It is a very long-term project to where it's going to be operating basically flat, and we make our margin and we maintain that the margins that we need, kind of talking at the beginning of the thing, to where we're sustainable and 10% won't kill us. That is over in the production side of the business, because like low volume production has the margins that we need, and then the high volume production loses those margins. But anyhow, since we were now forced to produce filament, we are now a filament manufacturer. And other filament manufacturers see us as a competitor, even though we don't care about filament manufacturing. We didn't want to do it, but we were forced into it. And equally, I think we were forced into doing the $10 filament because US manufacturers were not willing to compete with Chinese. And it is fantastically irritating to me that US manufacturers, that international manufacturers who are thousands of miles away are able to be cost competitive with local manufacturers, especially for a commodity. They are not making artisan chairs and shipping them over here, and we just don't have the artisans around. No, 3D printer filament is a commodity. It is toothpaste, it is tennis shoes. It has no differentiator between one manufacturer or another. They are all the same. The US manufacturers are just more expensive. And that is shameful. Because for the Chinese, I have nothing against the Chinese, but in the context of US versus Chinese, for China to be able to outcompete local manufacturers who have the exact same equipment, when they have the exact same equipment, the exact same raw materials, only closer, because a lot of them use Ingeo, which is made in the States, and the exact same raw material, which is shipped over there and then shipped back, that's ridiculous. And it angers me that an operating business is not competitive with China, but then is angry that we're competing with them because we're competing with China. In the context of Tangled, I do not look at any other U.S. manufacturer. When we work on it, we do not consider any U.S. manufacturers. I think it is the duty of filament manufacturers to create a unique product, create a filament that eliminates layer lines, that looks interesting, that's a different color, whatever it happens to be. But if you are making black PLA, that's a commodity. It is unsustainable because whether we did it today or in 3 years, it's a commodity and it will be commoditized. The other factor that is working against these filament manufacturers is that while mass production printing is a minority of filament demand right now, over the next 5 years, it'll become the majority. 3D printer, mass production 3D printing will absorb more raw material than consumer 3D printers in the next 5 years, which is also, again, why we built our own filament production, because there were very few suppliers who could keep up with us. But anyhow, that's a bit of conversation about Tangled and U.S. manufacturing. Tangled is an exposure of a flawed business model. The upselling of a material that has no implicit improvement to it. So I know several manufacturers watch this podcast because I've gotten notes from almost all of them. And guys, to all of you, this is not meant to be a bashing or, well, no, it kind of is. We have to be competitive and we have to be independent. And competitive on price is part of it. Made in the USA cannot be the differentiator. That's not good enough. The rest of the world is moving forward. For us all to stay the same and not improve or innovate or create new stuff while the rest of the world is moving forward and just say, be patriotic, buy made in the USA, that is the most regressive type of idea in the world because it creates stasis and laziness. And quite frankly, helps to take the US to where we are right now, to where we can't make our own latex gloves during a pandemic. So anyhow, to all those guys who are watching here, the ones that we work with, we appreciate, and you guys do a great job. But equally so, we started making black PLA filament because our suppliers were not able to do it for us in the way that is necessary in order to grow the industry. There has to be a lower cost source of material than has existed before in order to allow 3D printing to continue to hit that scale, which we were talking about earlier. That is one of the things. Low cost of raw materials is so necessary to hit the massive scale that printing needs to enable to have more parts printed. So lower cost of raw materials, more parts get printed, which means that we can now lower the cost of raw materials and this flywheel spins on. You lower the cost, you increase the demand. The increased demand lets you lower the cost further, which increases the demand more. That kind of stuff. It's a very Henry Ford type of idea. You can make a premium car and you will make plenty of money doing it. But if you make a cheaper car, you'll make a lot more of them, still making plenty of money. And you improve the world as a whole rather than for a certain subset of folks. So, I'll probably get in trouble for this. Who knows? Hope not. There's been a number of people who've called me about competition and that kind of stuff with what I consider to be just silly points. So not on the notes. Competition is one of the worst forms of growth. I fully agree with the capitalist system that competition creates strength, but competition should only exist as a form of motivation. If it becomes a form of restriction, then it's being used incorrectly. Competition is having another guy running next to you who's almost neck and neck with you, and he pushes you on to be a little bit further. That's competition. But there's a form of competition, but what this gets bastardized into inside of industries very often is the fear of competition, which is, I'm gonna steal your running shoes so that you can't run the race. That type of stuff. That is the dirty type of competition where it's not a race where two people are fighting against each other, but just a preemption. That being said, even if you are a competitor, helping your other competitors is often very useful. For example, we are a filament manufacturer. We manufacture filament. However, and we have, as part of manufacturing filament, we have a fairly large following here on YouTube. All you guys watching this show. We use suppliers to make filament, and we have featured a number of those suppliers on this channel. A couple of them make filament. Why did we do that? Why did we let our competitor, both our 3D printing competitors, know who our supplier was and let other people know that even though we make filament, this other guy makes filament too, and we think they do a good job? Why did we do that? Why didn't we compete and not let them get in on it? Because collaboration is way better. if we are interested in growing the industry, growing the size of the pie, then it is incumbent upon us to help grow the industry. The reason we shared videos promoting some of our suppliers is because hopefully some of you guys buy filament from them. By buying filament from them, they have a little bit more money, they're able to be more profitable, and they have more demand, so they buy more machinery. If they have more machinery, they can make more filament and should be able to do it cheaper, which means they can sell us filament more cheaply, which then they can reduce costs, and then you guys buy some more, and on around the mulberry bush it goes. We're not competing with anybody. Right now, the 3D printing industry is so flippin' small that if any 3D printing company competes with another one, you're being a flippin' moron. Because the industry could go sideways so far. Go compete with injection molding. Go put those guys out of business. They're not doing anything anyway, and they're slowly dying on 3% margins anyhow. Go after them. Stop fighting with other 3D printing companies. Stop trying to sell your machine over the other guy's machine because your machine has a red button instead of a blue button. It doesn't matter. Help each other. Send the leads over to your competitor when they do the job better, because it brings more customers into the industry that we can then all start churning and trading around. Don't try to be anti-competitive where you're stealing somebody else's race shoes. Just be competitive. Go to the gym a little bit more often and dig down deep when the guy's neck and neck with you. But the best thing to do is when you run the race, just all agree, we're going to walk this at the same speed or as fast as we can, or we're going to push each other along or relay this sucker. There's other ways through this mulberry bush. And if human history is any indication, collaboration is a way better operational strategy. But collaboration cannot be set into motion by an economic system. Capitalism allows continuous motivation from self-interest. That's why it's the only economic system that works. Collaboration has no incentive structure except for moral or philosophical soundness. And you can't rely on humans for that. But anyhow, yes, we actively promote our competitors because it grows the pie. Hopefully it helps them so that they can grow more, get better, be cheaper, and grow the industry as a whole. But for some reason, our competitors then go and say, no, they're not going to work with us because we're their competitor. This was interesting. Actually, here, I'm going to make this public. With the Tangled Kickstarter testing, we have like the sponsored route where it's like $500 and you can choose which filament we test, which effectively means a company can sponsor that and say, test our filament. We spoke to a number of manufacturers, and one of them hesitated and said, you're technically a competitor, Gabe. We don't want to put our filament on your video. And I was like, well, you're technically a competitor. I don't want to put your filament on my video. So let's just both do this. There's obviously we're hurting ourselves by letting you on our channel if we want to be competitive, but you're hurting yourself because you're putting your stuff on our channel or whatever it was. It made no sense. And I'm perfectly happy to say this makes no sense. And if the person knows who I'm talking to about, fine, I don't care, whatever. But it was just a silly type of an argument. And it was interesting because it's like the testing videos get 20 to 50,000 views. And that is not to buy that with like Facebook ads right now would be more than, it's expensive. The sponsorship opportunity to test your filament and put it on a video that will get the views is actually a fantastic deal. If you ever try to like sponsor a YouTuber or something like that, it's a very good deal. I'm going to get in all kinds of trouble here for what I'm talking about on this podcast. It's a new year. Let's start it off right. But I don't care anymore. I just don't care. It's been that kind of a week. But yeah, anyhow, And the other thing that was the silly about that argument too is that if we were doing one of the testing videos, you put it in a machine, you crush until the graph goes up to something, and you say, there, it was that strong. That's the format of the video. So even if we put that manufacturer's filament against our filament, the only way they could get in trouble is if their filament is worse than ours. And we would not put our material in the same video as a single other manufacturer. I have no doubt that we will be doing testing videos in the future where we will do Tangled PLA versus whoever, competitor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we just crush them all until they all break. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but we would never do something sleazy like, here is this competitor's row of material, and we can all see this is the Tangled PLA as a last little throw in of like, and our material is better, buy ours. And that's the final tagline of the video. We would never do that because number one, it's sleazy, and you guys are all not idiots. So if we were trying to do something sleazy by manipulating the format of the video to just promo us at the end, that'd be the dumbest thing ever because nobody would watch that video. And secondly, if we're doing it in a data-based way, what are we going to do? Be biased about the numbers? This one was 17, but that one was 17.1. Oh, but we all know that doesn't make any... But it's a number. Whatever inflection I put on it, it's the number. It's that strong. It stood up to 500 pounds. Good gracious. So I did not understand what the problem was in sponsoring a Tangled video or having us present a video of the Tangled video. But anyhow, yeah, the Tangled testing is what we're planning to call the other YouTube channel. Yes, it's branded after Tangled Filament, so sue us, whatever. Most of the people who purchase the Tangled Filament want to know how other manufacturers are. And again, the whole point of Tangled is to reduce the cost of raw materials in 3D printing. Part of that charter is to define what material is good compared to its cost. And that includes everybody. So Tangled testing is perfectly legitimate and within that charter. So yes, yeah. Most of the, we will actually probably use the Tangled Filament website for posting a lot of the data for these videos, which I suppose is a little bit biased because, yeah, you can go buy our filament on that site, but I don't want to buy another URL. And again, it's the data. We'll put freaking Overture on there if they have better filament or whatever else it was. You should buy the best filament, and we should actively advertise filaments that are better than us because it makes us better. To be scared of competition means that you have a really inferior product or a very mediocre product at best. Flaunt yourself. And if you're not flaunting yourself, what's the problem? Oh, that's right. We're all selling a commodity. PLA is the same everywhere. Anyway, did I mention it's been a really long week? It's been a really long week. Let's see. Correcting the news. This should have come in the news section, but with the 2024, wow, this podcast has gone a long time. Correcting a news story. Small correction. Being pedantic. I gave a quote to an article in one of the 3D printing publications about what was happening in 3D printing in 2024, my prediction for 3D printing in 2024. And that prediction was that a lot more final products would start making their way on shelves in 2024 than many people have ever seen before. A lot of them. Both what I can see internally from clients at Slant 3D, as well as what is very clearly happening out in the industry. But in that article and around that quote, I was mentioned as being Slant Gabe Bentz, CEO of Slant 3D, who uses desktop 3D printers in a farm. I take umbrage at that. We don't use desktop 3D printers. We use custom-designed industrial 3D printers optimized for print farms. There is a difference between a desktop printer and a desktop-sized printer. If you want to go by desktop sized, common SLA machines are desktop sized. They have a build volume this big, even though the machine's enormous, but the build volume is this big. So it's a desktop machine. Just because our outer housing is desktop sized, it does not mean it's a desktop printer. I'm being a nerd. A desktop printer is a printer designed to be user-friendly and utilized inside of an individual's home. An industrial 3D printer is a machine designed for high-volume, continuous use with low amounts of maintenance and high performance and reliability. Different machines. Just because they're same size doesn't mean they're a desktop printer. And we're one of the largest print farms in the world. Okay. I'm done being pedantic and self-righteous and mildly arrogant. Maybe a lot arrogant. I don't know. The API release. Yeah, the API will be releasing here in a couple weeks. The API has been going through beta over the last throughout the Christmas season. It was what was operating the Etsy app. The bugs that we had with the Etsy app were not actually with it. The API has been performing flawlessly. The bugs with the Etsy app were within front end and within Etsy itself. Working with Etsy is very difficult. They're somewhat inconsistent and not very software focused. But but anyhow, the API will be released here in a little bit. So hopefully there's been a number of you who have reached out wanting to use the API ever since we announced it last year. And it should be available very soon with documentation and that kind of thing for you to use. So it should be coming out very, very soon. Yeah, all good stuff there. But yes, the API will be releasing very soon. Final notes. No, this is probably one of our longest podcasts in a while. Hopefully some of it was useful to someone. I do hope. Hopefully it wasn't super damaging to us, but sometimes what's got to be said is got to be said. Have a great day, everybody.